"Hello, my old friend," Griffin said aloud as he stared out the window at the dark spot. It had been at least 2 decades since he had seen the Shadow Man. A moment later, Julie came into the bedroom and stood next to Griffin at the large bay window. "Holy crap. Is that him?" she exclaimed. "Is that the Shadow Man?" Griffin simply nodded next to her. "I'm just utterly amazed. I can't believe you grew up next to that creepy ass thing outside your window. We've got to put this on Facebook." She left the room for a moment and Griffin sighed. Was he really about to live in this room again? Julie returned a moment later, cell phone in hand, camera at the ready. "Open the window for me, babe. I want to get a good shot of that thing." Griffin complied with his wife's request, rotating the small metal handle at the base of the window. Julie leaned out as far as she could without making it dangerous, and proceeded to take several pictures of the dark spot, both with and without the flash. A few moments later, she was sitting on Griffin's childhood bed and scrolling through the shots, cursing excessively as she did. There was no doubt that Griffin loved her to pieces, but she did have the mouth of a sailor from time to time. "You can't see him in any of these shots. It's horrible. How much did we pay for these damn phones again?" Griffin put his hand on her shoulder and tried to console her. "Sorry, sweetheart, it just doesn't show up in pictures. Believe me, I've tried." She responded. "Screw that. We're digging the expensive camera out of this box tomorrow and we're getting a picture of that thing. I think it's the one in the study, where we put all the electronics." Practically, their entire existence was packed away in a box, somewhere in that old house. They were in the process of moving into Griffin's childhood home. He had spent the first 17 years of his life in the very room they would be sleeping in that night. It was a beautiful, Victorian-era home, the kind that just weren't made anymore. It had 4 bedrooms, but his parents had converted one into an office and one into a sewing room for his mother, so there were already only 2 choices where to sleep, and it just didn't feel right sleeping in his parents' old bedroom, and he probably never would. Griffin's father, who'd made a substantial living as a heart surgeon, could do nothing for his own health, however, and died a year before from lung cancer. His mother passed on 6 months later, most likely from a broken heart. Griffin gave some consideration to selling the property, but Julie was having none of it. "You would hate yourself if you let anyone else move in here." And she was right. Discovering that Julie was pregnant 2 months ago was the main reason they opted out of their loft in the city for the slower life of rural living. The yard, if you could call it that, was nearly 4 acres across, but the highlight of the entire property was this enormous oak tree that was sat directly behind the house. The house had been there for nearly a century, and the tree had been there for much longer than that. One couldn't tell exactly how old it was, without cutting it down and counting the rings, but Griffin imagined around 500 or 600 years. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility. That's where the Shadow Man lived. There was a bare patch facing Griffin's bedroom window, a bare patch which at night became the dark spot. When one looked out the window at that angle, the shadows of the dark spot came together to create a perfect humanoid silhouette, crouching on a branch. It only happened after dark. There was something about the combination of the back porch lights and the light from the work shed that filtered through the leaves, creating the perfectly disturbing image. There was even 2 dots of light where the eyes would be, and a small line that could easily represent an uneven smile. Griffin was around 6 when he first noticed the spooky image, and although he knew full well it was just a trick of light and shadow, even at that age, his young fertile imagination took a hold of it, especially in his dreams. With thick leathery skin that looked like oil poured into a human mould, it had no nose or ears, only eyes and a large lip-splitting grin, defined by sharply pointed, pearlescent teeth. It would slink into his window at night and terrorise in a variety of ways, from crouching on young Griffin's chest and watching him struggle to breathe as he slept, to crawling up the walls and ceiling where it would hiss at the terrified child through his barbed teeth. These were, of course, only nightmares, but the effect they had on his mental state growing up was significant. To say his formative years were troubled would be an understatement. Once he reached high school, however, Griffin had matured enough to realise the paranoia was of his own doing, and the majority of his dreams became about girls. But the Shadow Man never left him completely, popping by once every couple of weeks, just to say hi. He remembered standing in that same spot his last night in the house before he left for Johns Hopkins Medical School. He remembered looking at the shadow man for what he thought he was going to be the last time, and thinking, "I'll never see you again, and I will not miss you." He was half right at least. "I guess I was wrong about that one," he muttered to himself. "What's that?" Julie mumbled back, still scouring over the pictures of the dark spot. She just couldn't figure out why she could only see branches and leaves, and a bare spot, especially in the pictures where she used a flash, instead of the menacing silhouette she could clearly see with her eyes. Straining, she tried to figure out what part of the tree contributed to the illusion. "Nothing, just talking to myself," he answered. Julie threw her phone down on the bed in frustration. "Well, one thing's for sure," she sighed. "There's no way I'm going to be able to sleep in here with that damn thing outside the window. I mean, geez, I don't know how you did it as a kid. That thing's fucking scary." Griffin smiled. "You get used to him." Julie shook her head emphatically. "Oh, hell no. And don't call it a him. Tomorrow you gotta put up floodlights or something." Griff continued to smile. "And tonight you've gotta hold me real close, you got it, Griff?" Griffin sat on the bed next to his pregnant wife and held her tightly. "I won't let him get you tonight," he whispered jokingly. The next morning, Griffin rose before Julie, which wasn't uncommon. Most days he was at the hospital before she awoke to the automatic coffee maker's aroma. Since he was on leave for the move, he could have slept in with her if he wanted to, and maybe he did, but internal clocks can be difficult to reset, especially his. He was a creature of habit. They had a lot on the agenda for the day anyway, the biggest of which was to move the lion's share of his parents' possessions to the sizable attic and basement. There were some things that could be sold, and some things that could be given away, but much like the house itself, most would be too hard to part with. That didn't mean the stuff needed to stay where it was, however. Griffin was adamant when they decided to make the move that the house had to be the home of Griffin and Julie Masters, and not that of Ben and Mary Masters. It wouldn't be fair to either of them to try and make a life in a home surrounded by possessions and memories of someone else's life, even if it was his parents. Julie, who was a bit of an aspiring decorator, was so excited for the opportunity to decorate the immense estate. Anyway, who was he to take that away from her? He loved his wife so much. Even if she slept with no makeup and a bird's nest on her head, she was the loveliest thing Griffin had ever seen. Turning from her, he looked out the window at the oak tree and the bare spot. How many times he had looked at that spot during the day, just to try and piece together what he was seeing at night. What knob, what branch, what series of leaves contributed to this eerie figment that appeared at night. A greater percentage of his childhood was spent studying that bare spot than he'd cared to admit, even to himself. And here he was, 20 years later, doing the same damn thing. After his coffee, but before Julie woke, Griffin left for the local hardware store to get a floodlight for the back of the house and had it mounted by lunch. When the sun finally went down, they discovered how well it worked, and as it lit up the entire backyard like Ringley Field, there was absolutely no risk of the Shadow Man's return with it on. However, there was a very high possibility that neither of them would be able to sleep ever again. It was so bright it filled the bedroom and half the hallway. "I guess I won't need that lamp to read in bed anymore," Julie had joked, but still ended up sending him out to shut it off. "I guess the Shadow Man wins again," she continued to kid as he came back to bed. He found himself he wasn't able to laugh with her. It was such a stupid thing to even be concerned with, but he was. He was a renowned doctor, for Pete's sake. There were so many crucial things he needed to worry about, but now the Shadow Man was back in his thoughts. He refused to leave. The only saving grace was that he'd yet to appear in Griffin's dreams again. Several days had passed before the Shadow Man came up in conversation again, mostly because there was so much to keep busy in the unpacking process, but also due to in part that Julie had stacked the bay windows full of boxes and had scrubbed the view out. When they were finally removed, she saw the dark spot again. Julie jumped into action with the recently found Pentax 645D digital camera, which ran around $10,000 when Griffin had gotten it for his wife for Christmas before. Similar to her current decorating aspirations, amateur photography was her passion at the time. If Griffin was being honest, there was very little his wife couldn't do. It was just hard to keep her focused on any one thing for an extended period of time. She had an extreme ability to master her passions very quickly, and then became bored with them, as was common with people who shared very high IQs. That was, of course, one of the many things he loved about her. She managed to snap a handful of pictures before the front doorbell rang out, drawing her attention away from the task. It was the closest neighbours of 30 years who had come to welcome Griffin back to the area. With crumb cake in hand, ready to meet the new wife of the lanky teen they remembered being so introverted. It turned into a lovely evening with the Macmillans, sharing a few embarrassing stories from Griffin's youth, but mostly reminiscing his parents. They'd become very close to Ben and Mary over the years, and their death probably hit them the hardest. "They were just so sweet," Julie had said later that night in bed. "I wanted to scoop them up and put them in my pocket." Griffin nodded in agreement. "Did you see the way he kept holding her hand?" She cozied up and put her head on his chest. "Are you going to hold my hand like that when we're their age?" He took her hand and turned it over on his own, so much that people would think we're glued together. It was, as usual, the perfect answer. It had been a wonderful day, and the topic of the Shadow Man hadn't come up at all. Griffin hadn't given him a single moment's thought, until Julie's last words before drifting away to unconsciousness. "Decorative lights." It was so soft he barely heard her. "What? What lights?" Yeah, she was slipping fast, her eyes already closed. "Lights for the tree. Damn Shadow Man." And then she was out. "Fuck's sake," Griffin muttered. He had almost made it to the state of sleep without the Shadow Man invading his mind, and now, albeit unintentionally, Julie had placed him front and centre, and just as he was about to enter the dream theatre. He tried desperately to push his thoughts elsewhere. His patience, the move, even the sweetness of the Macmillans, but to no avail. The Shadow Man just kept pushing his way in. Falling into a deep REM state, Griffin found himself face to face with the demon. Although his was the face of a 10-year-old Griffin, and not his current stature, they were seated across from one another on the floor, the creature crouching, while he sat cross-legged. This was a new scenario, one that he'd not seen before. The Shadow Man was making more aggressive moves, only smiling its unsettling smile, and in a moment of odd lunacy, Griffin seemed to realise that he was in a dream. The revelation emboldened him to reaching out his hand towards the Shadow Man. Perhaps making the contact would be the key to overcoming this psychological power. This thing had held him for so long. The Shadow Man reached his hand out as well, and the fingers were only inches apart. Griffin felt unafraid. For the first time ever, he felt like he had some degree of control over the situation. It was his mind after all. Shouldn't he be the one to direction the action? "What do you want from me?" Griffin asked, completely calm. "Why won't you just leave me alone?" For the first time that he could remember, the Shadow Man made a noise other than a hiss. It was disturbing. Physically nauseating screech, somewhere between nails on a chalkboard and a dental drill. It started small and began to grow louder and louder, to the point where Griffin had to cover his ears with his hands. But even then it penetrated right into his brain. He began to scream as well, just as the shriek reached crescendo, and Griffin thought he could take no more. The Shadow Man leapt from his spot onto the floor, onto the young boy's chest, knocking him backwards. Adult Griffin shot upright in bed, knocking Julie from his chest in the process. She mumbled something incoherently and rolled to her side. Griffin was soaked with sweat. The dream seemed like a minute or two at most, but the alarm clock going beside him said differently. It was 5 in the morning, and although still dark outside, he was more than ready to start the day. He rose and gave the dark spot a horrible glance and headed towards the shower. Lowe's will be open in a few hours, and he's ready to do some shopping for some more decorative tree lights. Being the first person in the store was convenient, if not a little surreal, but he had no idea what he was looking for. This was Julie's area of expertise. He'd really only received half a conscious suggestion to work with. Christmas tree lights were probably not what she had in mind, but then again, who knows. He ended up settling on everything. The final bill was just under $2,000, as he purchased every possible lighting for a tree. Some things were even intended for that purpose, but hopefully he could find a way to make it work. Julie could make that decision. He could tell from her expression that his walking in the door with 6 large Lowe's bags as Julie sat in the kitchen with a table coffee was a bit of an overwhelming start to her day. "Okay," she said, feigning sarcastic indifference. "This makes perfect sense. You said you wanted tree lights." He dumped the bags on the kitchen table before her. "So, here you go." "So how many trees were you planning to light up?" He laughed. "You pick, and what we don't use, I'll take back." Julie started sorting through the various packages and shook her head. "Geez, being away from work is absolutely killing you, isn't it?" Griffin chuckled in agreement. It was better that she thought that rather than the fact he might be slipping back into a childhood psychosis. His profession brought him close to all number of neurosis, and he knew well the power of the mind. Unfortunately, these were things he hadn't been trained to treat. Not that he was ready to go down that route for himself just yet. It was only a nightmare after all, and he wasn't a child anymore. Julie ended up deciding on a $30 set of cordless electric candles that could be placed strategically around the tree and lit via a remote control. "You can probably get these up in a couple hours," she said. "Don't you think?" Griffin skeptically admitted that it might take a bit longer by the time the sun went down, a little after 7. Highly motivated and armed with a hammer, nails and a 40-foot ladder, Griffin was more than a little disappointed, only getting 3 into the tree before the lack of light made the endeavour too dangerous to continue, leaving the ladder leaning onto the oak. Griffin called it quits for the night and decided to take a short walk around the property. There was a well-worn path towards the edge of the yard that young Griffin had walked at least 1,000 times, but not for a few decades. It brought back memories of summer nights and catching fireflies, and it was where he was in a deep state of reminiscence when Julie's distant cry broke through his entrancement. "Griffin?" The panic in her voice was evident, and Griffin broke into a sprint. Adrenaline fueled, he made it back to the door in just under a minute. "Julie?" "In here," she called from the living room, and he hurried to her. Finding her on the couch hunched over a laptop, Griffin wasn't sure what he expected to find, but fortunately, this wasn't it. Her voice had scared him so badly that his initial reaction, he was ashamed to admit, was one of anger. That type of scream that should be only reserved for morally impacting situations. "What the hell, Jules?" He tried to not let the irritation come through. "You scared the shit out of me." She looked up from the screen to his face, and the anxiety came flooding back. Griffin could not remember ever seeing the look on his wife's face. Drained of colour and full of creasing lines he had never seen before, the fear-induced expression made his neck hair stand on end. All she could utter was, "Look," as she pointed to the computer screen. Griffin joined her on the couch and for a moment wasn't sure what he was seeing. Was this some kind of horror website or something? And then it hit him. He knew exactly what he was looking at. It was a picture of the Shadow Man, in the dark spot. The uber-expensive digital camera not only captured the image previously, only available to the naked eye, but it enhanced it to the appearance significantly. It was there, in the dark spot, in perfect clarity with details only seen before in Griffin's night terrors, crouching on the branch, as it always seemed to be. Its legs could be seen easily, its arms, its chest, its elbows, its shoulders, neck, torso, everything plainly in sight. This was no trick of the eyes or shadowy illusion. This was a clear image of a real creature, sitting in the tree outside their bedroom window. They sat there in silence for several long minutes, staring at the image, struggling to wrap their minds around it, while working it through. Griffin came to a realization that this made something in his mind snap, and brought him into action. If this damn thing is real, then so was all the shit it had put him through growing up. Anger overcame that particular fear, and he ran into his father's gun cabinet in the upstairs office, grateful they hadn't hauled it into the attic yet. After grabbing his father's Belletti double-barrel shotgun and tactical flashlight, Griffin started to head back downstairs, taking a quick look from the hallway and through his bedroom window at the Shadow Man, crouching where it always was, as he headed outside. Griffin was aware that his behaviour was that of paranoid, delusional, psychotic, but if that was the case, then Julie was too. She was in the kitchen and made no effort to stop him when she saw the shotgun. Worry etched on her face. She reached one hand out towards him, her eyes telling him to be careful, while her mouth remained unable to move. Outside, he got up to the only space right outside the house, which provided any type of ground view of the dark spot. It was an uncomfortable angle, and he had to strain his neck to see anything at all, but there was something. It was too hard to tell. It could be a trick of the eye, but Griffin could swear he could make out the edges of 2 knees poking out, and possibly the top of its head. He had never tried to look for the thing from this angle before, and even if he had, he wouldn't have been able to see anything from a child's height. Griffin snapped the tack light onto a plastic fixed attachment to the top of the gun, and levelled the instrument on the dark spot. He turned the flashlight on, flooding the tree with illumination, and any resemblance of the creature he might have thought he saw was gone. Just an empty branch and a bare spot. Turning the light off brought back the small bit of it again. He screamed at the tree, his voice unbridled hatred. "Get the hell out of my tree, you little bastard, or I'll blow you out." Griffin wasn't sure what to expect, but what he didn't expect was that it would move. Despite Julie's pictures, there was something in the back of his mind that refused to believe that the Shadow Man was real. It was just so outside of his realm of reality that he still expected it to be a usual optical illusion, combined with extreme paranoia. Then, out of nowhere, the Shadow Man's head leaned forward and made eye contact with Griffin, and all of that went out the window. Griffin flipped the light back on instantly, and nothing. He was still a little remiss to fire. The last thing he wanted to do was blow a sleeping squirrel or bird's nest out of the tree. They gave to charities, for goodness sake. The light was extinguished again. It was fully leaning over now, almost fully exposed, its sharp little teeth grinning at him. As soon as it began hissing the horrible dream hiss, Griffin fired the first shot. The painful high-pitched squeal from the night before echoed out into the night air, unexpectedly, and the shock of it combined with the weapon's recoil sent Griffin falling back. There was a deep thud of something large falling to the ground several feet in front of him. Griffin fumbled with the shotgun for a moment and then switched the light back on, scanning the area. He got quickly to his feet and flipped the light back off. It was there, writhing on the ground, and when it knew it had been seen again, it began hissing. Griffin levelled the gun out again, and was about to fire the second shell when he heard Julie calling out from behind him, and turned for a split second. "Griff, are you okay?" When he turned his attention back to the Shadow Man, it was gone, and no combination of the turning light on and off brought it back into view. There were, however, thick black drops on the ground around the old oak. Blood? Maybe he had killed it. For the first time in a long time he could remember, Griffin felt a sense of relief. Not that this would matter in the long run. That seemed to be it, and for every night after, the dark spot only looked like a dark spot. It really wasn't even that dark, as one could see a small patch of night sky shining through the centre of it. This was irrelevant for Griffin and Julie, however, and the house was sold a month after. They would be raising their new child in the city after all.